The morning my mother's will was read, my brother already knew how the story ended. He'd known for years, actually. We all had. My mother built Callaway Fine Catering from nothing. 32 years. She started with a folding table at the county fairgrounds, selling brisket sandwiches and her grandmother's peach cobbler out of a cooler. By the time I was in middle school, she had a commercial kitchen downtown and a reputation that stretched 3 counties wide. By the time she retired, Callaway Fine Catering handled corporate events, wedding receptions, hospital galas. The kind of clients who expected everything perfect and called at 10 o'clock at night to change the centerpiece order. My brother Sean had been running that business for the last 8 years. He knew every vendor, every contract, every client relationship. He'd expanded into event rentals, tables, chairs, linens, tent structures. He hired the staff. He built the website. He drove the company van with the logo on the side like it was already his. I didn't do any of that. I became a hospice social worker instead. If you said that out loud at any family gathering, people would nod like it explained everything. Sean was the one who mattered. I was the one who chose differently. That's how the family framed it. As a choice, my choice, as if I had walked away from something obvious and valuable just to be difficult. What nobody framed as a choice was what happened after Mom got sick. She was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's when she was 67. At first, it was manageable. A slight tremor in her left hand, some stiffness in the mornings. She kept working, kept driving herself to appointments, kept insisting she was fine. Sean sent flowers when she got the diagnosis. He called every Sunday. He told everyone at the company holiday party how strong she was. By the time I was 31, her condition had progressed enough that she couldn't safely live alone anymore. Her neurologist was direct about it. She needed consistent daily support, not just help, but presence. Someone around in case she fell. Someone to manage the medication schedule, which had become genuinely complicated. Someone who could drive her to the appointments that were now twice a month, then weekly, then sometimes twice a week as her symptoms flared. Sean and I sat together in her kitchen after that appointment. I remember the refrigerator hum. I remember the way he held his coffee cup without drinking it. "I can help financially," he said. "We can look at in-home care. There are really good agencies." I understood what he was saying, and I understood that he wasn't wrong exactly. In-home care is a real option. It exists. But I also knew my mother. I knew she would hate a stranger touching her things. I knew she'd refuse to ask for help from someone she didn't know, and then fall trying to do things herself at 2 in the morning, rather than press a button. "I'll move in," I said. Sean nodded. He looked relieved and uncomfortable at the same time. Are you sure? That's a lot, I know. We can split the costs of, it's fine," I said. "I'll figure it out." I gave up my apartment in the city. I moved into her house, the one she'd lived in since before Sean and I were born, the old Victorian on Caldwell Street with the wraparound porch and the windows that hadn't been properly sealed since 1998. She called it her forever home. Sean called it drafty. It was both. For 4 years, I balanced my caseload at work and caregiving at home. I want to be honest about what that looked like because people use the word caregiving and imagine something gentle. Helping someone get dressed when their hands don't cooperate the way they used to. Cutting food into smaller pieces without making it obvious. Driving to the pharmacy at 7 in the morning before work because the prescription wasn't filled in time. Sitting in waiting rooms, talking to insurance representatives on hold for 45 minutes. Learning the difference between a specialist's office that actually calls back and one that doesn't. Sleeping with the door cracked open so I'd hear her if she got up at night. My mother was not an easy patient. She was stubborn and proud and deeply embarrassed by her own needs. The way a woman who had run a business alone for 3 decades tends to be. Some nights she pushed back on everything. Some nights she cried quietly and pretended she hadn't. I didn't mention those nights to anyone because they weren't mine to share. Sean visited on holidays. He called on Sundays. He sent a fruit basket at Christmas and a gift card for her birthday. When relatives asked how Mom was doing, he always said, "She's hanging in there. She's a tough one." He said it with real love, I believe that. But there's a difference between loving someone and being there. At family dinners, the conversation always circled back to the business. Sean had landed a new hotel account. Sean had hired an operations manager. Sean was looking at a second kitchen space. My aunt would pat his hand and say how proud Mom must be, and Mom would smile and say she was. And I would refill water glasses and think about the medication log I'd left on the kitchen counter and whether I'd remembered to request the refill on the levodopa before the weekend. Nobody asked me much. I was there. Being there had made me invisible. Mom passed away quietly on a Tuesday in March, 3 months after her 74th birthday. She'd had a rough fall, a bad stretch of progression, then pneumonia, then a slow decline that I watched with the particular helplessness of someone who knows the clinical stages and still can't do anything to change them. She died at home, in her own bed, the way she'd wanted. I was holding her hand. Sean drove up the next morning. He cried in the kitchen. We both did. The funeral was large. She'd known a lot of people, business contacts, longtime clients, the families of people I'd never met who had apparently eaten her food at some event years ago and remembered it. The service was beautiful. Sean gave a eulogy that made everyone laugh and then cry. He spoke about her work ethic, her vision, what she'd built. I sat in the front row and listened. A week later, her attorney, a quiet, careful man named Mr. Voss, called us both in to read the will. The law office was small and smelled like old paper and coffee. There were framed bar certificates on the wall and a window that looked out onto the parking garage across the street. Sean arrived 5 minutes early in a button-down and sport coat. A few of Mom's closest friends and her sister came too. The room felt strangely formal, the way rooms feel when money is involved. Mr. Voss settled in behind his desk. He organized the papers in front of him carefully, the way people do when they want you to feel that everything has been thought through. Your mother's estate has been organized thoughtfully and in stages, he said. He wasn't reading from a script. He just said it plainly. I'll walk you through the primary bequests first. The room settled. Callaway Fine Catering, the business entity, all operating accounts, client contracts, equipment, vendor agreements, and the leasehold interest in the commercial kitchen on Merchant Street, passes entirely to Sean Callaway. Nobody looked surprised. Sean straightened slightly in his chair and gave a small nod like he was receiving a report he'd already expected. The residential property at 4417 Caldwell Street, Mr. Voss continued, along with the personal property therein, passes entirely to Adrian Callaway. That was my name. A few people exchanged glances. Sean's expression didn't change exactly, but something in his posture relaxed. He uncrossed and recrossed his legs. He glanced at me sideways. The house, he said. Not to anyone in particular. He said it the way you'd say, that's it. His friend, a guy he'd brought along, some business contact or golf buddy, gave a small, careful smile. Sean shook his head almost imperceptibly. Then quietly, he said it directly to me. You spent 4 years of your life in that house taking care of her. He paused. And you got the house. A few people pretended not to hear. A few couldn't hide that they had. I hope you're ready for the heating bills, he added. That place costs a fortune to run in January. I didn't answer. I was looking at my hands. Mr. Voss cleared his throat. He had not closed the folder. There is one additional matter, he said. His voice was steady and neutral. Your mother left specific instructions that it be addressed separately, and only after the primary estate was distributed. Sean looked up. She was quite deliberate about the timing, Mr. Voss said. He reached beside his chair and lifted a second folder from his briefcase. Softer than the first, worn at the corners. He set it on the desk. This contains a letter your mother wrote approximately 14 months ago, as well as several accompanying legal documents she asked me to prepare and hold. He looked at both of us. She asked that the letter be read aloud. I felt something tighten in my chest. Mom was not a woman who wrote things down often. She said what she had to say face to face or not at all. If she had written a letter, she'd meant every word of it. Mr. Voss unfolded several pages, handwritten, on her personal stationery, cream-colored paper, with a small C monogram at the top. Her handwriting was shakier than I remembered it from years ago. She must have written this during a difficult stretch. He read, "If you're hearing this, then I've already gone, and you're sitting in Alan Voss's office, wondering what comes next. I want to say a few things before anyone starts calculating." I heard Sean shift in his seat. Sean built something with me. He took what I started and made it bigger and steadier, and I'm grateful for that. The business belongs with him because he understands it in ways that took decades to learn. That's not a small thing. Sean nodded, relaxed again. But I want to explain something I never said out loud while I was alive. Because I didn't think I had to. I was wrong about that. The room went very still. 4 years ago, when things got hard, when I needed someone not just to send money or make phone calls from a distance, but to actually be present, one of my children rearranged her entire life to come home. She gave up her apartment. She came to every appointment. She sat in every waiting room. She learned every medication, every side effect, every name of every doctor. She never once asked what she would get for doing it. She only ever asked me what I needed. My eyes burned. I was not going to cry. I told myself that. I did anyway. Adrienne never complained. She didn't keep score. I know she heard things at family dinners that must have stung. Conversations about the business, about Sean, about the future. And she sat through all of it without saying a word. I noticed. I always noticed. Mr. Voss paused and turned the page. That's why I did something a few years ago that I didn't tell either of you about. The room shifted. I saw Sean's attention sharpen when a development firm approached me about the Caldwell Street property. Specifically about the land and air rights attached to it, given its location near the new transit corridor. I quietly had those rights assessed and separated from the property deed. I then entered into a preliminary agreement with a regional development company. That agreement has since been formalized. Silence. The Caldwell Street property sits within the designated opportunity zone along the Route 9 transit expansion. The development rights attached to that property, which I structured separately so they would transfer cleanly, have been appraised and contracted. The figures are in Alan's folder. Mr. Voss set down the letter and picked up one of the attached documents. He slid it across the desk. Sean grabbed it before I could reach it. I watched his face. I watched his eyes move across the page. I watched the color shift in his neck. He stopped. This says the rights valuation is. He looked at Mr. Voss. This can't be right. It is right, Mr. Voss said simply. Your mother had the assessment done by 2 independent firms. The agreement with Greyfield Partners was signed 8 months ago. The terms are fixed. My aunt leaned forward. What does that mean? What does the number say? Sean set the paper down on the desk. His jaw was tight. The development rights attached to 4417 Caldwell Street had been valued, contracted, and structured as a long-term ground lease with a regional development firm. The projected income over the initial lease term, plus the lump sum signing payment my mother had negotiated before she died, totaled more than twice the current valuation of Callaway Fine Catering. My aunt made a sound I couldn't describe. Someone behind me said, "Oh my God," very quietly. I sat very still. Mr. Voss picked the letter back up. I want Adrienne to have financial security. Not because of what she did for me. I can't repay that and I wouldn't try. But because she is someone who gives without thinking about what she'll get back, and the world doesn't always reward that kind of person on its own. I wanted to make sure it happened at least once. My throat closed. Sean will have his hands full. The business is real and it's valuable, and it also carries the expansion loan he took out in 2021, the equipment lease renewals coming up this year, and the staffing obligations from the hotel contract. He knows how to handle all of that. He is capable and I trust him. Mr. Voss turned the final page, but I wanted everyone in that room to understand something before they decided who got more and who got less. Adrienne came home when I needed her. She didn't do it for a reward. She did it because she loved me. And that is worth more than any asset I could leave behind. I just wanted to make sure she also had the asset. He folded the letter. The room was completely silent. I didn't look at Sean. I couldn't. After a long moment, Mr. Voss began walking us through the remaining documents. The lease structure, the Grayfield Partners Agreement, the payment timeline. The signing payment alone was more money than I had earned in the last 6 years combined. I heard the words, but they came from very far away. At some point, Sean asked a question about the expansion loan. His voice was different than it had been an hour ago. Careful, measured, stripped of the easy confidence that had walked in with him. Mr. Voss answered. Sean asked another question. He was already doing what Sean does, which is work the problem, look at the numbers, figure out the path forward. I don't say that as a criticism. It's one of the things he's actually good at, but he didn't look at me, not when we stood up. Not when people hugged me and said Mom's name. Not when my aunt held my face in her hands and cried. He walked out to the parking lot and stood by his car for a while. I saw him through the window. I thought about going out there. I thought about what I would say. I decided I didn't have to say anything. Mom had already said it. She'd said it better than I ever could have, in her careful, shaky handwriting on her monogrammed cream stationery, 14 months before she died. She'd been paying attention the whole time. She'd just waited until she couldn't be argued with. Outside, the March light was thin and pale and cold. I sat in the parking lot in my car for a long time before I drove back to Caldwell Street. Back to the wraparound porch. Back to the windows that needed new weather stripping. Back to the house that had cost me 4 years and apparently, according to 2 independent appraisers and a signed agreement with Grayfield Partners, was worth considerably more than anyone standing in that room had imagined when they heard my name called. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. I felt tired and sad and grateful, and a little undone by the fact that she had thought of this, had planned it quietly, had sat across from me at the kitchen table through all those hard months and never once let on. She had known. She had seen everything she needed to see, and she had made sure it mattered. On the drive home, I passed the old fairground where she'd started with a folding table and a cooler full of brisket sandwiches. It was empty that time of year, the grass gone brown and flat. A chain-link fence ran along the edge of the lot. I pulled over and sat there for a minute. I thought about the first time I saw her work a room at one of her events. The way she moved through a crowd, making sure every table was right, checking in with the kitchen, thanking the staff by name. I was maybe 11. I remember thinking she was the most competent person I'd ever seen. I still think that. She never stopped being that person. Not even at the end. Not even when her hands shook, and she needed me to button the small buttons on her blouses. She had run her last negotiation from a hospital bed, apparently. She had signed the Grayfield agreement 8 months ago, which was during the worst of it. And she hadn't told me because she'd known I would have told her to focus on resting. She knew me well enough to know I'd have tried to talk her out of planning for my future. I smiled at the empty fairground. Then I put the car in drive and went home. There was still weather stripping to deal with. The windows on the north side had been drafty since last winter. I had a list on the kitchen counter. Things I'd been meaning to fix for 4 years and kept putting off because there was always something more immediate. Now there wasn't. The house was mine. The quiet was mine. The porch and the old oak in the backyard and the drawer in the kitchen that had always stuck were mine. And somewhere in a file at Mr. Voss's office, a signed agreement with Grayfield Partners was also mine. I thought about what my mother had written. She didn't do it for a reward. She did it because she loved me. She was right. I hadn't done it for a reward. I'd done it because she was my mother and she needed me, and there was no version of myself that could have done anything else. But I was glad she'd known that. I was glad she'd seen it clearly enough to write it down. I was glad she'd made sure other people heard it, out loud, in a room where it couldn't be dismissed or minimized or explained away. That, more than any contract or appraisal or signed agreement, was what I drove home with. That was what I kept.